Hello everyone, welcome New Londoners, Epsilons, and Savages alike. I'm Angeliqué Roché, and this is Brave New Pod, the official podcast of Brave New World, the new original series available exclusively on Peacock. This is our last of 3 episodes, yes, the very last, and if you thought this was the first, then you should probably go check out episodes 1 and 2, but then come right back here to check out episode 3. Also, though, we're going to be covering 7, 8, and 9. So if you have not watched all of Brave New World, then you're going to want to go back, watch the episodes, and then come listen to these conversations. You're not going to want to miss them. With that, let's get started with showrunner David Wiener. We got to get into 7, 8, and 9.
Sure.
Things go very quickly once we get here. Very, very quickly.
Right.
So we've gotten this idea and we've established that New London is a utopia. And we get a glimpse of this abandoned, because this word abandoned keeps coming back into the show, right? This, Linda was abandoned. John was abandoned, and the city below has basically been abandoned to make way for this brave new world, this new London. But we also are allowed a little bit of a sneak peek as we travel down with Indra and Mustafa, and we're allowed to see the 10 scientists, I guess, from Soma, who created Soma, who also created Indra, who allowed her to go everywhere. What was your inspiration for Old London and for the 10?
Well, I think that this is where we do kind of lean into the science fiction and building our backstory around an AI. And to us, it was a matter of figuring out, what was the history of the creation of Indra and how does ultimately Indra work? And the construct of Indra is that she runs in the substrate of the human consciousness. So each brain, which turns out is like an incredible processor. It works at like 1 petaflop per second. I'm not sure exactly what a petaflop is, but it's huge amount of information. And that if you wanted to kind of have the most powerful AI, you would, interlink all of these, you would network all of these processors and have kind of a massive global brain. These 10 people that we discover who were part of the initial people that saw that the world was in crisis and came up with a way of addressing it. These are the people that originally started making the optic interface, and we do go with Mustafa and see kind of what the old, headquarters looked like. And we do see Elliot in this video after meeting him on the beach. And we realize that he's the genetic, progenitor of all of the CJAC epsilons. Because you would need a source when you started cloning them. That basically that these world controllers are the inner ring around that core. And so these are the central aspects of the network that connect to Indra itself.
They are me. Yes. I am them. I exist in the substrate of their consciousness. All these networked brains, the living computer.
I mean, they're central processing units. Their brains are a processing unit.
Exactly. So, rather than in the Matrix, everybody's a battery. In this one, everyone's a CPU linked to this kind of the central ring of processors. And that these bodies are being maintained through Soma and, who knows, some unseen nanotechnology if you want. But we also know that Mustafa has a place there amongst them and hasn't joined them. Elliot, when she meets him on the beach in 6, entreats her like, come lay down with us. We know that he's experiencing this virtual reality. He complains about it. He complains about being on vacation with all of these people. But he's saying, and we get that there's a real affinity and affection between them from the past. And he's saying, come lay down with me. And she won't. And I think at that point, we start to realize that Mustafa has become really attached to the experiment.
They're not your children. The scientists don't name the rats.
But it's clear that Mustafa is emotionally invested in the future of New London, and that's why she won't quit on it, even though Indra has, we also realize in the 7th episode, Indra's found the state of being in which humans are most stable. Because that's Indra's directive, is achieve stability, achieve stability.
I've solved it. My directive. Achieve stability in any system, any simulation.
It's not a simulation.
You keep saying that, I don't know what it means.
It means this is real.
And she's been doing this for, hundreds of years. She does this in the same way like a human immune system might. Like she might bring in something to test it, to create, to create the antibodies, if you will, to make the social body stronger. And I think that's what Mustafa initially expects John's arrival to be. But we do learn that Indra's figured out that there's a state in which humans, where they're most stable, which is death. But Indra doesn't have the same sort of sentimental associations with death that we do, or Mustafa does. Although I think that she learns by the end, Indra that she says she realizes she doesn't like being alone.
At the same time, it seems that the luster of New London is wearing off, and John's core values are peeking out past the honeymoon phase. His new conditioning, his Soma, and this what we kind of thought was an acceptance of his new surroundings is really, really wearing off on him, particularly because of his budding relationship with Lenina.
Yeah.
His hopeless romantic came out.
Exactly. And not only that, but his savage monogamy. John, in the sense that John realizes that Lenina needs to, John and Lenina connect, and they start to fall in love and become monogamous, which is obviously not permitted in New London. In order to keep up appearances, Lenina has to continue to behave like a proper beta plus, which involves, the behavior that we've seen to this point. Like she's out there being sexually available in the way that betas are expected to be.
I'm a good beta plus, 22 hours a day. I belong to everyone else just so they won't ask, just so that we can belong to each other here like this. You think that doesn't cost me anything?
Okay. Then stop.
John, this is what I mean by a savage monogamy, doesn't feel good to him. He feels jealous. He feels hurt. He, I think, spends a lot of time stewing over it and imagining what that could mean, or he has the reaction I think most human beings would to having the person that they're in love with sleep with someone else. To Lenina, it doesn't mean the same thing, but to John, he obviously can't get there, and he doesn't have the a New London attitude. So John begins to resent that, and he begins to resent the fact that this place that's supposed to be a utopia will not let him love, will not let two people be together as they want to be. And so he's in a real predicament. And the other thing that happens is that Lenina starts to, this begins to affect Lenina too, and she begins to question the sexual expectations put on betas. If you think about it, there's a real dark side to the expectation that everyone's always saying yes to sex. It's like really the sexual coercion of a whole class of people. And we see that and again, how we deal with sex becomes, less and less idealized, and more, I think, exposes how messed up that is. And so, so Lenina gets to a point ultimately where she does the most revolutionary thing in New London, and she says no.
This is my body. It's mine, and I want to be the only one inside it right now.
Well, and it's interesting because she stops taking her Soma at a certain point, or at least brings it down very, very strongly. She becomes more aggressive. She's got this moment on the court where she's playing against Franny.
Oh yeah.
What's she doing? Winning. What are you doing?
Such an incredible line, and such a strong line of showing where her character is going. But I gotta ask, her clothing starts suddenly becoming red and rose, and suddenly she's no longer in this monochromatic black and white, which is very clear by these last 3 episodes, is reminiscent of this idea of the game of Go. And now I have to go back and watch the whole series all over again to pay attention when someone is dressed in black and when someone is dressed in white.
Yeah.
But suddenly Lenina is the one in red. She is different. She is coming to this different realization. Is there some kind of symbolism that was done in changing her wardrobe in that way?
The thing that we talked about was, how do we kind of, first of all, it goes fully red by the last episode, which is aptly titled Soma Red, and we see other people in it too. Like, it's become trendy almost, like it's infecting the rest of the social body as well. But we also needed, because it is a really kinetic episode, to be able to kind of visually identify Lenina in large, tumultuous crowds. And there's a independence and power, I think, to the color itself that I think by that point Lenina's grown into, and it felt right.
But these changes, Lenina becoming emboldened and expressing her feelings and how she dresses and acts in public and defies others' advances, is a part of a larger chain reaction that stems from the introduction of John into the ecosystem of New London, emblematic of a larger threat to the balance and order that New London is so used to. In fact, Lenina's behavior in these moments is only one of the ripple effects being carried across all of the characters of Brave New World, even the world controller, Mustafa Mond.
She's breaking down, yeah. She's physically breaking down. She's been alive for too long, and flesh is flesh. So she's kind of a freak of nature, I guess, or on nature. But also it's kind of symbolic of the virus that's entered the program, of John that's entered their perfect world and put a crack in the whole system. So yeah, that's kind of that sort of works on many levels. But she has to learn how to say goodbye. That's what she don't want to. She don't want to go anywhere. She wants to see.
I mean, I feel like her character in and of itself has become, this is a story of a bunch of scientists, right? Like, Lenina is testing, Mustafa is testing, Indra is constantly testing. And I think it's very interesting because one of the common themes that comes from the source material is John has always been considered a test on the system.
Right. Yeah.
And Mustafa at a certain point goes, I let him in.
I let the savage in.
Right? Like, yeah. It was my choice to let him in. Like, what was the goal here? Like, was it that you're entering this random variable to make it stronger? Like, is that the theme? Or are you really truly trying to continue on what seems to be the initial mission, which is find a way for life to succeed in a better way where we humans don't destroy everything?
I mean, she says she let him in, but she didn't really. I mean, the system, Indra, let him in.
How does the savage cause the fatal event? If you end this simulation, you will no longer exist.
That's not her choice. I think she would much rather that it carried on, because she's trying to, you get the idea when she goes to see Elliot on the beach, that is actually underground. There's a new virus.
What's it look like?
A man. You get the feeling that this is a cyclical thing, that she's trying to perfect, this keeps going wrong, something keeps going wrong, which is what happens with civilizations. We tend to evolve physically, but not socially. We keep getting stuff wrong. We keep going to war. We keep messing up the environment. It leads to chaos, and then we have to start again. We don't seem to learn how to achieve this level of whatever it is we're after, utopia, happiness, whatever it is. And so it feels like she's trying to perfect it. I don't think she didn't want him there. That wouldn't have been her choice. But now he's there. So this is a test. So she'll take it as a test and see if she can overcome it this time.
About midway through, you start realizing that this is a big game of Go for Indra, whereas Mustafa seems to be like, I'm here, I'm up for the challenge, and Indra's like, oh no, we've solved this already. We're just gonna hit the self-destruct button.
Yeah.
What is the moment that you believe like Mustafa is like, well, I guess we're just gonna have to shut this all down, and takes on that kind of accountability of basically killing the other 9 world controllers?
Yeah, it's I think it's when she realizes that there's that Indra's got so far, particularly because Indra seems to be becoming more human. Then of course that's the humans are the problem. So it's just going to go wrong again. And then she goes down and she sees and she's looking through the game the equations that Indra is playing, and realizes that it's kind of counting down to suicide, to like you say, the self-destruct. And so then it's then that I think that maybe she realizes that she's just going to have to change the rules. You can't keep playing the same game and hoping for a different outcome.
What is that?
Your move. Because that's kind of insanity. So, which she's, on the edge of. So,
that's very clear, particularly in the conversation between Mustafa and Helm, right? It's just this moment where Helm, who has clearly gotten to a point where she is trying to tap out of the Matrix because of her desire to feel, confronts Mustafa on feelings. And it almost feels like the world controller has become the thing that she's trying to create on compartmentalizing her feelings. And again, it's a surprise. It's a surprise that the thing that she created is in its emotional state nascent. Like it's an adolescent. It's acting out and it doesn't want to be alone.
Yeah, and you realize that, like any good science fiction, it's just about what it is to be human. And you will always, however much you try to squash, the more you try to squash human instincts, the more they're just going to pop out somewhere else in a weird and potentially disastrous kind of way, or beautiful way. But yeah, the very thing that she's trying to even out, to kind of iron the bumps out, just another one appears elsewhere. And so yeah, she realizes that, I don't think she realizes, but she's trying another approach. Mainly because it's completely got out of her hands, really. I mean, by the end, she's controlling nothing. I mean, she says that to Henry, we control nothing. There's no...
That scene between Mustafa and Henry Foster was incredible.
But inside...
Dark in there, director.
Honestly, for you, I think it showed so much more emotion and feeling than your character had been allowed up until that point.
Yeah.
And it was almost shocking for the audience, because like, oh, if she is not in, like, she's literally not in control of herself at this point.
No, there's no hope for anyone, really. The world controller's losing her mind and admitting that she's not, I can't do anything. No, this is life.
Like Nina said, the more you try and squash human instincts, the more likely they are to pop out in weird and disastrous ways. And no character in the show is a greater manifestation than weird and disastrous than C-Jack 60, played by Joseph Morgan. For you, particularly as a seasoned actor, but also as a director and kind of coming into this role, what for the audience do you feel C-Jack 60 represents?
I think initially it's the innocence. I think that he represents a completely innocent view on the world, on New London. And, he just, from the beginning, we're experiencing these things. Now, he's not a stranger to New London, but he's a stranger to these feelings and to being able to question how the society is run and how that whole world works.
You gotta ask yourself, if this place is so perfect, why is it upside down? Let's stare. Stare back.
So I think we're coming at it from the point of view of someone who has just realized that the world he's living in is completely fucked up and he is at the bottom of it. And so are all of the people that he cares about. And that has a huge emotional weight for him. And I think that, I'm hoping that is what will resonate with audiences and what will connect them to CJAC 60.
Which I think is pretty amazing, right? Because there's this incredible scene at the Pleasure Bomb where CJAC 60 is like, his hand starts moving and he starts questioning this idea of why do they do that? Right. And why don't we do that? And it's this slow journey that's kind of happening and kind of an awakening that this character is going through.
You know, from the moment he starts, and I think that moment you brought up in the Pleasure Bomb, once he sees the violence and he makes the fist, he realizes, I need that guy, John. You know, he's the key to all of this. And then there comes a point where during the finale, near the very beginning, when he realizes we don't need this guy anymore. Like, we're doing this with or without him, this revolution. But then, like I say, it's a fast track because as this violence takes place and we start, you know, brutally murdering all the inhabitants of New London, CJAC looks around and goes, oh, wait a minute, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't creating the freedom that I thought it would. And so then he ends up, you know, putting himself in harm's way to try and protect some of the residents there, and realizing that that wasn't the key to their freedom. That isn't them being truly free. And so, yeah, it's he's a revolutionary, and then immediately has to flip that on his head because these emotions, which he's still processing, which he's still learning to understand, suddenly guide him to realize that this is wrong. The thing that he's been driving towards is wrong when witnessing it.
Why are we like this?
Well, it seems that this all kind of happens in this moment in the director's office with Bernard, where they're, you know, what is happening in this? Like, you see him come in, you see him realize that this was the guy who had been there when his friend died. And there's almost something that clicks in his head. And it seems like empathy, but I can't necessarily tell because he's still trying to figure out what all of these emotions mean.
That's actually my favorite scene I did in the whole show. And I do feel like that's the turning point for CJAC that was needed, you know, that's the moment. And I think it's because Bernard brings up his friend, you know, CJAC 57, who died in the beginning. And then when faced with death, Bernard is just so sort of vulnerable and human. Mm-hmm. And that reminds CJAC 60 of his friend. And he realizes that we're all more alike than we thought, and that we are all children in this world, you know, who are just trying to play our part that we've been given. And we're all as kind of fucking scared as each other, you know. And I think in recognizing that humanity and that vulnerability in Bernard, that's the turning point for him, where he realizes this is wrong what we're doing. It's not like these are alphas and betas are the oppressors who have chosen this way and are very aware of how they just as programmed as the rest of us, you know?
I mean, does this, because there's a certain point where I don't think the audience is necessarily privy to what Mustafa has now called CJAC 60 in to do. Like, I feel like this goes into him going, yes, I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this stop. But what does Joseph Morgan look like when he reads, oh, I have to choke myself to death? Okay, well, cool.
I thought that was the greatest thing ever. That was the ending I was hoping for. Because, you know, like, I'm playing to these two characters, and everything's driving towards an end. So I thought, and I'll be honest with you, I'm rooting for Sijak more than Elliot, you know, just because I've been with him for longer on this journey and I empathize with him. And so I was really blown away by that journey. By the end to that, it was what I wanted. I felt like, and also, you know, there's a sense of Mustafa taking Sijak to this vault and going, you're looking for who's responsible for this. These are the people responsible, and this is how we change the world. You know, this is how we change it. This is the answer that you were looking for in that violence that you were creating there. In terms of the physical, the logistics of shooting it, you know, of course I was Sijak, and then I had to go and get changed really quickly, and they had a stuntman who was playing Sijak, and I was Elliot, sort of waking up and looking at myself. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was terrific. It was the ending I hoped for my characters.
Joseph took us almost to the end of the story, but before we get there, I want to go back and retrace our steps with John, the Savage, played by Alden Ehrenreich. I want to take it back and I want to talk about, you know, when we first meet John in the series. So I think this sets up a lot of what is happening towards the end of the story arc, towards the finale. He really doesn't believe Linda about this whole he's from New London. Like, it is not until he gets on this rocket ship, he goes through this fence that should have just disintegrated him, that he has any idea that there's truth to his mother's story. What was John's perspective and sense of himself before the events of coming to New London?
I think that you believe the vision of the world that your parents give you when you're a little kid, no matter what it is. So she's telling him that, and why wouldn't he believe that as a kid? But then as he gets older, everybody else in this town doesn't believe it and thinks that she's basically has delusions of grandeur and is an alcoholic and all the rest.
Remarkable.
Mom.
Yeah. No, I mean, you should know this.
No.
Yes, it's who you are.
Please stop. And so, you know, I think he comes to realize that his mom is this delusional person and that she's living in a fantasy world and he can't shake her out of it. So he just tries to get by and do the best he can with it. And then you see in the show that being completely turned on its head, that she is all along telling the truth. And there's no time to process it, you know, like he jumps into that and then jumps into everything that happens with the director and like all these things like just keep happening. And so there's a kind of, he's in a state that's pretty unpredictable and pretty chaotic and frenzied after a certain point in the show, which I think those are, to me, like where I really thought the story kind of took off in a new way.
Which I think is really interesting, right? Because you have this moment with the director, you also have this complete, like it's a departure from the source material. I remember the moment that John takes the Soma for the first time, and I'm like, oh, we're going on a ride. We're going on a ride with John, and I don't know where this is going. And it really is, for the middle of the series, this ride where he's like, okay, I'm here. I'm along with this. Yeah. I'll tell your stories. I'll try to fit in.
It was me against him and his inbred brothers. 4-1, 7-1, plus his dog.
And then something happens in like episode 7, and John falls in love.
Right.
Is John really in over his head at this point? Like, does he not truly understand that this is a system he knows nothing about?
You know, for me, it's like he goes and has this experience of fame and attention that's a kind of looks like what he's always wanted or part of him has wanted, but he quickly tires of it. And then when Lenina comes along, or when he's able to reconnect with Lenina and kind of act on sort of things he starts sensing in the early episodes, that's really what he's been after forever. That's what he's wanted forever. And, you know, and I think the rest of the world, its consequences melt away in a way at that time. There's some blotting that all out.
And there's this moment where you see Lenina and John's relationship do this, and this immediately just start crashing in the most drastic way.
You know me.
Do I?
Yeah.
One, like, do you feel like John is holding the world or Lenina to this unrealistic standard that's kind of in his head? Or is this just like John being trapped in a system that he obviously does not control?
I think it's both, you know. I think like it's interesting, and it lives in this gray area, you know. There's something really great about that instinct that says like, this is all bullshit and I want to follow what I feel is true. But sometimes that reaps certain consequences that, you know, you might not be seeing. And I think that's what's cool in this, is that you have this almost riptide or something that gets unleashed as a result of what John's trying to do with Lenina. There's this undertow that starts as a result and starts to spread, and in ways that he's certainly not counting on and surprised by.
I mean, let's be honest, John's cavalier attitude towards the world starts spreading in a lot of ways, right? Because his sudden answer for, I don't want to feel these feelings are overwhelming, I cannot fix any of this, is that he goes to Helm, which is this relationship that I think also was like bred out of this idea of appreciating feelings and being able to be there.
I can make anyone feel anything. All you have to do is connect.
Is John evolving or regressing when he decides he's like, yeah, I'm gonna put this contact lens in. I'm just gonna tap into the matrix because that's the answer.
I think he's at the end of his rope at that point, and what he really wants is to find a way to make this work with Lenina, and it's these feelings that he's having are making it almost impossible. And so ultimately, even though he's against it, he's going to do what he can to get what he wants.
Wow. And I think that's because there's such a beautiful scene that happens at the beginning of episode 8 where he's put the contact lens. He doesn't yet even know how to see. Like it's almost like this overwhelmed brain overload situation.
Yeah.
And it's opening Pandora's box, right? Because now he gets to see a little too much.
Yeah. I mean, just on a basic level, if you've never seen any kind of civilization or technology of this kind and you're thrown into it in this level of technology, it's crazy. I mean, it's like almost imagining somebody from the 40s waking up in our world trying to wrap their head around the internet and all the different, you know, and VR headsets and Dyson vacuums. It's like very challenging to, you know, you're like, what the hell is this?
And there are a number of times that John becomes very overwhelmed, which is a great segue into his relationship with CJack60. You know, I've had a couple of conversations where folks have kind of thought about what this relationship is and actually talked to Joseph Morgan about it. Like, what is this relationship that we're seeing happening with John and the Epsilons? Why does he feel so connected with it?
Well, part of it is what he says when he's with Lenina. They have this conversation and he talks about like, I was them, you know, like that's how he's felt in the Savage Lands forever. And so he is on pretty familiar terms with the feelings that he knows they must be having.
You like them?
Well, I was them. I used to clean people's shit. Except they've got each other. I was alone.
You know, John sees through the veil of like this kind of state-sanctioned happiness in a way that nobody in New London can because they were conditioned. And so he knows that it's like, that it's essentially a lie, that it's built on this hypocrisy. And so he can, and then he realizes that like these people who have been in a way like the colonizers his whole life in the Savage Lands, like these are people who have controlled it, and all the Savage Lands people are dependent on New London, and he realizes that these people who are in such a position of power are actually really naive, and really he can manipulate them because they're kind of children,
I mean, does that make John a good person or a bad person, or is this John supposed to be neither?
I think he's supposed to be neither. I think everybody is. I think that's like kind of the challenging and interesting thing about the show, is that it always lives in this moral gray area. It kind of puts being a human being before being a good person or a bad person, and lives in those feelings. And everybody on the show does things that are destructive. Lenina treats Franny kind of shittily sometimes, and there's all kinds of things that kind of come up that because everybody's trying to deal with their feelings. And that's why I think the show is cool, because it's taking on these themes and these stories that are obviously resonant with the world we live in, and yet only communicating sort of how it feels to live through these things, rather than prescribe any kind of answer about what things should be. John does something that feels really good, which is leads this rebellion against what he sees as an oppressive system.
You want to be happy. Or do you want to be free?
And then there's a whole host of consequences he didn't intend. So,
I mean, it was just a bloody coup. I mean,
yeah, it turned into that fast. Yeah. So
for John, he accidentally starts his bloody coup.
Right.
But John, being a reluctant revolutionary, somehow doesn't outweigh being in love with Lenina. So he gets, in the middle of all of this, John is like, I'm out.
Yeah, that's what he really cares about, the most. And it's kind of almost about passion that doesn't know itself very well, that doesn't know where to point itself, and there's a kind of self-righteousness in that passion that doesn't realize when it's having all kinds of consequences, doesn't realize, he's been living in his own fantasy world in Savage Lands for a long time. So when it comes out, it doesn't necessarily look like or have the effect that he would have once imagined it would. Being able to take a stand, and and I think the way the writing charts that from his childhood to who he is growing up, to the world, to him coming into this world, is really you see the arc, And
I think it's interesting because you also get to see all those ripple effects happening at the same time in the season finale. Those ripple effects, some of which were touched on by voices earlier in this episode, take us through the end of the show. And none of them are more fundamental to the structure of New London than the disconnecting of Indra.
Yeah, based on the structure that we established. And, we actually have Mustafa visually represents this on the Go board when she's talking to Indra, that, they're going to unplug that place where everybody's connected to Indra. And what unfolds from that point forward in the course of that episode is this kind of fantastic intercut montage done by this wonderful editor, producer named Tom Hemmings, where we're watching as New London gets unhooked from the AI that created it. And we see it manifest in these violent ways. We see it manifest in these small ways. We see the eyes turning off. We see the signifiers vanishing. And then we see that Indra it kind of goes for her lifeboat, which turns out to be Bernard. And so we go into Bernard's eye, and we've seen parts of this vision going back to the first episode of, what happens when this falling into this artificial consciousness, and Bernard falls. And we're familiar with a big part of this fall, but then he falls all the way down to what we call the Red Room. And there he is, and we see him with Indra, and around him are all of these frozen raindrops, and inside these raindrops you see that they're like little teeming worlds of their own. And Indra says to him, there are other places.
Where am I?
Nowhere. With me. But there are other worlds.
The question I think that we leave dangling is whether are these, in Indra's mind, simulations that she's also connected to. But then, and she realizes that she can't stay. And we wonder where she goes until Bernard's in the back of that, the truck at the end, and we go into his eye and see that he's still connected.
But I gotta know.
Right.
What's in the box?
What's in the box? I knew what was in the box. I still think I know what's in the box. But I had a really incredible conversation with someone recently who may have changed what's in the box. But, the box can be a lot of things. What we do know is that what's in the box is of value to Sheila and to her.
Clearly, because Sheena did not kill them on sight.
No. And we also know, and what we'll, I think, hopefully see is like that, the state of affairs that's unfolded in the Savage Land since we left it is in need of a lot of help, and that Bernard and what's in the box are uniquely positioned to help them.
With a little assistance from Wilhelmina Watson.
Yeah. I mean, who's gone there for another reason. She's going there kind of like on an emotional safari, if you will. Like she's going to this place where everybody feels like John.
Where?
The place they feel everything.
And I think that, it's kind of a radical move. I think she believes she's more ready for it than she is. But I'm hoping we get the chance to make more of this, because I can't wait to write Hannah in those scenes. Like, it's going to be, I think, really funny and beautiful and surprising, as she always is.
In my brain, she wakes up the next day and she goes, I'm tired of feeling.
Yeah,
I'm
right?
done.
Right.
So I got to end on this. There is this wonderful juxtaposition of Lenina and John, where I'm sure everyone had their expectations of what was going to happen in their scene, where the Epsilons rush past them and don't see them.
Right.
And these big questions, even at the beginning when John first put the contact in, and he didn't even have a level, right? And this idea that suddenly levels are now keeping them safe in the way.
Or lack thereof. Yeah, if you take out your optic, obviously there's no level, right?
They can't see you. They don't know if you're the target.
They won't touch us. No optic, we're invisible.
But Lenina is in charge. There's suddenly a Beta Plus who's got a mission. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to put it. And I think that, at the end, obviously the book ends very differently. John hangs himself. Very
tragically.
Yeah, John hangs himself, and he beats up Lenina and then he hangs himself, and it's not very much text given to a massive event at the end of the book. It's something that Huxley actually questioned later when he wrote a book a decade later about writing Brave New World, and he kind of wondered if that was the right ending, if he had kind of been a bit reductive. What was important was to show that John had gone to a place where he was going to be alone with himself and have to kind of wrestle with, who he is, and that we set up, that he's still remembering Lenina, and he has this device that he used to kind of conjure her in his brain. So I wanted us to know that they weren't done, and that there's more to that story. But for Lenina, I also think that the right ending was, if we come in through her eyes and watch her change so radically over the course of the season, that the right way to end it is her, about to step foot one step further than she's ever been from New London before. So we go to that shot, and and she does have something she needs to do that Mustafa has given to her at the end. And I'm sure, as everyone can deduce, that mission probably has something to do with Indra's escape, if you will.
She's out there somewhere. Indra, feeling for the first time, like a child.
You know, just a highly emotional adolescent AI who's just starting to feel feelings, but also feels slightly abandoned out in the world. No big deal.
Right, should be fine.
But yeah. That's how these things end, right?
But it's cool.
At the end of the day, we find most of our characters on the very opposite end of where they started. Jack60, who started in a menial work, is now a fully actualized character. Henry Foster is 6 feet underground. Bernard, who seemed to finally get what he wanted by becoming director of stability, finds himself in the back of a pickup truck with him, Watson, driven by savages in a place with all of the fields. But most importantly, holding the remains of a society he worked so hard to belong in his hands, Indra, the AI. John, after embracing New London and then basically falling out of love with New London, is now living in the ruins of Old London with only an illusion of the woman he loves to keep him company. And Lenina, the former Beta Plus, with the preset function and destiny that was given to her by her status, finds herself as a fully actualized person and placed in a position of power by world controller Mustafa Mond herself. We don't know if this is the path that any of these characters are going to continue on. And there's no way of knowing how much further the ripple effects of their actions are going to reach. But we know that all of them are in uncharted territory. And from now on, each step they take pushes them deeper and deeper into an unknown world. Some might say, a brave new world. Thank you again to David Wiener, Nina Sosanya, Harry Lloyd, Jessica Brown Finley, Alden Ehrenreich, and Joseph Morgan for sitting down with us. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed listening to us talk about Brave New World, please let us know by rating and reviewing us wherever you're listening to. And now that you're done with Brave New World, you should go check out all the other amazing sci-fi content that's streaming right now on Peacock.